During this breathwork session, I think my third eye just, like, blew open in that moment, and I went into a Kundalini awakening where I was just laying on the floor laughing and crying at the same time, and it was, like, that moment where I just knew there was something so much more to this life. It was the first time that I really felt like that unity consciousness where it was just me and this universe. And it was so absolutely beautiful and powerful, and it was almost like my higher self was like, "Congratulations, you made it."
Today, I'd like to welcome a hypnotherapist and channel, Ceirra Hargan. Ceirra, welcome to Conscious Conversations.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited. I know we have some commonalities in our journey through recovery and addiction, and probably some similarities that we have now that we haven't uncovered yet. So I'm really excited to hear your story and so grateful that you're here to share your story with my audience. So, with that being said, can you give a little bit of a background to what your life was like before or leading up to where you are today?
Yeah, so I have always struggled with addiction. It's really started from childhood. So I was actually an obese child. I was never taught how to feel my emotions. My parents, they did the best that they could, but they had no idea how to handle their emotions. I was never taught how to, like, stop eating when you're full. So I would just go on these binges from such a young age because I was never taught how to stop eating or how to listen to my body. And then as I got older, as I got into the teenage years, then I still had no idea how to handle my emotions. It all just, like, felt way too much to me. So that's when I got into things like self-harm and alcohol at a very, very young age. And then it just continued to spiral and spiral as I was, like, running away from my emotions. So then it went to a drug addiction. And then it turned into by the age of 21, it turned into a heroin addiction with fentanyl and meth and these really, really hard drugs.
Yeah, wow. We do have a lot of similarities. So I actually started my addictive behaviors when I was 5 years old, and it started with an eating disorder. And then when I was 19, I had my first drink and got drunk, and I was off to the races in a whole new level of addiction. And now I'm curious because you had said that you weren't taught, I believe that's what you said, that you weren't taught to feel your feelings or shown how to handle your emotions. I would love it if you could speak to why that's so important to um, the topic of, addiction and recovery.
Yeah, so I just remember coming into this world and everything felt so confusing to me. Like, it felt like I could feel other people's emotions, and then that just made it even more confusing when I was growing up and I was trying to even just figure out what my own emotions were. And then we live in a society that teaches you to repress your emotions or to not feel them. Thankfully, that is changing, but this is so important to addiction because it's like we go outside of ourselves in every single way we can to try to make ourselves feel better. And so we create these habits where we're constantly trying to find something outside of ourselves to heal that or to repress that so we don't have to feel that. And I just remember being so numb that I just constantly I had no idea what direction to go. I had no idea, like, if I did have a feeling, I had no idea what that emotion even was. Like, before my spiritual awakening, I had never felt angry before because I just had so many emotions inside of me that I'd never felt before, that if I experienced something where I knew I should be feeling anger in that moment, I would just cry my eyes out because I was just so confused of what emotion I was feeling. And so this really started this habit of any kind of trauma would come up, any kind of emotion would come up, and I would just start repressing it and repressing it and repressing it. And it really started like when you get into other drugs, like when you start smoking weed for the first time, when you start drinking alcohol for the first time, I got to the point where I was like, "Oh, I could stop this if I wanted to, or I could still go to work if or I was still functioning." So I was always like a functioning addict in this world that just had these obsessive behaviors. So I would be able to talk myself out of it and say like, "Oh, it's not that bad," or "It's okay, you'll come out of this. This is just a phase." And I think that's ultimately what led me to the addiction that I had between heroin and fentanyl, is because nobody thinks that you're gonna become a heroin addict and be, taken down that path.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And I want to highlight something that you said. And that was, we're just trying to reach for something that will make us feel better. And one of the things that I learned in my journey through recovery, recovering from the eating disorder, recovering from substance addiction, was that I needed to have compassion for myself. And that was the thing that gave me compassion for myself, is that we're always just trying to feel better. Like our true intention is not to hurt ourselves. Our true intention is not to hurt someone else. Our true intention is just to try to feel better in that moment. And in those moments, my options were very, very limited. Like you just said, we never think we're going to get addicted to it, right? We don't grow up and say, oh, I want to be an addict when I grow up. We're just trying to cope and trying to manage. And so we reach for this thing that gives us relief in the moment, but really ends up burying those things that we need to feel and halting us from living our true joy. So I'm curious now, how did you find the path to recovery?
So, towards the end of my fentanyl addiction, when it really started to spiral outwards, um, because you can do those drugs for, like, as long as you possibly can sustainably, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. So I actually ended up in the hospital with a back infection for 2 weeks, where the infection was close to my spine, and if I had waited any longer, it could have been a lot worse than it was to go into the hospital, because I even knew I had this infection. It's like you can feel when something's not right inside of your body, and I still ignored it because, like, I knew they were gonna make me stop doing drugs. So, I still put it off as long as possible, and when I finally went to the hospital, um, I had to go to rehab. This is, like, during COVID and everything, and then when I got out of rehab, I still used after that, and this is when it really comes to, like, when you're ready to quit, paths and doorways just open up to you. So, me and my boyfriend, I think that, like, I wanted to quit, it was inside of me, it's just I was still in that environment. Like, I was still, especially during COVID when everything shut down, I was just locked down into my environment, so I just kept using and kept using. And then me and my boyfriend had this incredible opportunity to move to New York City, and so we were finally able to get out of our environment, and that is when I was finally like, "I cannot keep living my life like this." Like, I had to make that decision that was greater than myself to get myself out of it, and so I started a methadone treatment program. I had been on methadone multiple, multiple times in Colorado, but I was just in and out of programs. So for anybody that doesn't know what methadone is, it's a controlled substance that's used to, they say that it's used to help people get off of opiates, but it's called methadone maintenance. So when you get into these programs, they always talk to you about like raising your dose but there's not really an end in sight, or they tell you that it's going to take you years to get off of methadone. And so New York was the first time where I was in this methadone program, and I took my own healing by the reins and I started tapering myself off of methadone, but I also did the work at the same time. So Joe Dispenza is the greatest gift to society right now, I think personally. I will bring up Joe Dispenza in every single interview I do just because of the impact he had on my own personal life. I truly went from a fentanyl addict that had no hope less left to live. I've been to some of the darkest places the human experiences, and using Joe Dispenza's work is what freed me from that addiction. It's what allowed me to step back and be the observer in my life so that I can start making these changes and so that I could see how unhealthy my thought patterns were.
That's so awesome. And I just love speaking with other recovered addicts because I think that there's so many similarities. So, for example, you said that you went into the hospital and then you went to rehab. And when you got out of rehab, you continued to use. So, you're speaking my story. I went to treatment for an eating disorder, got out. 1 month later, I manipulated my whole entire environment so that I could act out again. And then a few years later, in 2012, I overdosed, and most any normal, sane human being would look at that and see that as the bottom. That changes me, but it wasn't. I still had another year left. So I got out of, I woke up, I came to an psych ward, came home and got loaded. And so I'm curious now. I have a theory about relapsing, but I'm curious if you would speak to the purpose and really the gift that comes with relapsing.
So it depends. I think this is where it like really depends on the drug and your situation. I was still on methadone then, so when I came out of rehab, it's almost like I knew I was gonna use. Like because it felt forced. Like it felt like I was forced into treatment. I was, especially when I was in the hospital, I was put on watch because I had um a pick line in me, and if you use hard drugs like that you can't be sent home. So it felt like I was forced into treatment, and it felt like I was forced into that methadone program. So I think it was like always in the back of my head that when I left that treatment program I was just going to go use. And so I think you have to take that first step, like I said before, like that decision greater than yourself, where you're ready to stop. And this is really hard, I think, for people that have loved ones that are deep into addiction. There are so many people that have like loved ones addicted to fentanyl and heroin right now. And this is where it's truly their path, and they're not going to quit until they're ready to quit. And so that's why when people are forced into these programs, they do just relapse. And then they haven't been taught how to like just step back and be the observer in their life, and how to become more conscious of the negative thought patterns that are actually doing more harm for them. And the problem also with like heroin and fentanyl especially is it truly makes you think that you're gonna die. Like, when you go into withdrawal like that, you have symptoms that I explain as like the worst flu of your life mixed with the worst anxiety of your life. So when that withdrawal starts to come up, your brain goes into such a severe fight or flight that now that drug is the most important thing in your life. So this is why you see a lot of addicts that are homeless, because now that drug is more important than shelter. That's why a lot of addicts they're malnourished and they haven't ate because that drug is more important than food or water. And so holding the space of love for your loved ones while they go through this, but also knowing that they're on their own journey. And this is why I have so much belief in the divine. That's why I have so much belief that there's a greater plan for you in place, because looking back on my journey now, I know I had a purpose, and I know that that's like the experience that I wanted to have, so that now I can help people see the light, and I can help people get out of those situations that are controlling their life.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language, sister. So, what it reminds me of now, I relapsed for 5 years. So, I got out of treatment from going to treatment for the eating disorder in 2008. But when I left, they told me that I shouldn't drink anymore. And for 5 years, I tried. And I got sober through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things that we learned is that no human power could have saved us from our alcoholism. So, literally, that was not my human power, not my parents' human power, not my kids' human power, no human power. Like, I had to surrender. And the bottom that I had was considered a high bottom, where other bottoms, I've had many bottoms, were very low bottoms, right? Like overdosing. But the bottom I had was the moment. Like, I think they all played a part into that one moment where I admitted to my innermost self that I was powerless, and that this time I was going to go and actually do the work. And we could be sober or not using, but until we have a psychic change or something switching in our minds and in our brains, we're not going to have a new experience. So I love that Joe Dispenza was such a beacon of light for you and got you to where you are today. Um, so I'm curious if you would speak to a little bit of that experience, part of your experience, the how Joe Dispenza really opened up, or the work that Joe Dispenza talks about, how that really opened up your mind and your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So first I just want to speak on rock bottom, because that was something that like I used to hear all the time as an addict, like, Ceirra, isn't this your rock bottom? Like, haven't you already hit rock bottom? How can you continue to go? And it's like, I think there's almost this perception about addicts where it's like, you've already hit rock bottom. Why are you still there? But what happens is that it's not that you're suicidal, it's that you just don't care if you wake up the next day. So when you have that amount of like hopelessness and that amount of sadness, and you've done so much work towards like you're numb or you're just using drugs to survive. So it's like you're not even getting high anymore. You're just using drugs to survive so that you can go to work. Um, it puts you just into this state of not caring if you wake up the next day. And so when you live like that, your entire life feels like it's rock bottom. And so I love how you said it's like almost like you had to go through like a psychic switch in your head where you make that decision yourself, powered by your divine essence, to get you through that, and that's what I love, and I think that that's, like, so I actually grew up very atheist. I was disconnected from everything my entire life. So my entire life, it just felt like me, my addiction, and my 3D reality, and it actually wasn't until I started doing Joe Dispenza's work where, like, I had already made that personal decision myself that it was time to get off of these drugs. But then I just started hearing Joe Dispenza in my head, and that had to have come from a place greater than myself. And so when you're ready to be sober, these beautiful doorways open up to you where the universe is like, "We'll help you. We want you to be sober also."
I love the idea of being ready. And you mentioned something else that I want to highlight as far as the journey of addiction, which I think is really hard for family members and friends and loved ones to really understand, is that we're not ready until we're ready. We're we have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it has to come from that connection to source within. Because as long as, my parents are saying, I want you to get sober, and my kids are saying, Mommy, don't drink anymore, which that wasn't actually the case for me, but, it's like, it doesn't matter. And then in my experience, it was like, why can't I get better for the people I love? Like I was trying. Why can't I get better for the people that I love? And it was like that powerlessness. Oh, I'm powerless. And I need a power greater than myself to guide the way. And I need to surrender to that. And those were the pieces that I believe really catapulted me into, I now have 10 and a half years of sobriety.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Miracle. If I can do it, anyone can do it. I mean, it's easy to look at someone with 10 years and be like, oh, they've got everything together. But I mean, if you go back 10 years, I was a wreck and I had no hope. I was in that hopeless space of even 90 days in, I called my sponsor and I told her, I was like, everyone at the meetings are so happy. And I just don't think that's going to happen for me.
Yeah.
And if you stick with it long enough, the miracle does happen. It really, really does, and continues to every day. Um, so I want to switch gears here a little bit because I know that you channel your higher self. I know that you're a coach and you do hypnosis. I'm curious because I've had a similar experience after getting sober. I became a coach. I also realized I was so sensitive as a kid that part of my addiction was numbing out all this information that I was receiving from the universe. So I'm curious, how and when did you discover that you had these gifts? Was it during your addiction, after your addiction? Um, Tell me about that.
So as I started doing Joe Dispenza, like I said, I just started doing his work to taper myself off of methadone, but it was really beautiful because it's like I just started with 15-minute meditations and I would realize that like my triggers weren't as bad or I wasn't feeling as much anxiety throughout the day. And I started like I've always had this thing where I cannot watch people eat. I can't watch people chew gum. That was my thing, right? It would, like, shake me to my core if I saw somebody chewing gum, and, I would realize that, like, that trigger was slowly getting easier and easier to deal with, and so, when I start just feeling my moods be better, and I was giving myself the space to clear the emotion that I'd been holding on to, that was when I, like, fully went all in, so I started doing Joe Dispenza, like, 1 to 2 hours a day, just giving myself the space to cry my eyes out because I'd never felt my emotions before, so it was, like, emotion from when I was 15 was just pouring out of me, but what started happening is that, like, I started having these little glimpses that there was something more to this life. And I started like once I went within, I started to feel that there was like this divine energy within myself. And I started to feel like the power of this light within myself. And so I started I tapered myself all the way down to 5 milligrams of methadone. I decided that that was it, that I was completely done and I started doing things like breath work and I started learning more about spirituality. So when I finally decided to get sober, I was 4 days sober and I was in such bad withdrawal that I hadn't slept in 4 days. And so I was like, I'm just going to do breath work so I could sleep. And during this breath work session, I think my third eye just, like, blew open in that moment, and I went into a Kundalini awakening where I was just laying on the floor laughing and crying at the same time. And it was like that moment where I just knew there was something so much more to this life. It was the first time that I really felt like that unity consciousness where it was just me and this universe. And it was so absolutely beautiful and powerful. And it was almost like my higher self was like, congratulations, you made it. You know what I mean? It was so beautiful. And like from that moment, that was when like all my spiritual gifts turned on and I was really catapulted into the spiritual awakening. And there's a lot of healing that I had to do with my addiction. I'm still healing layers of it, but that was the moment where it was like, you went through all of this for a purpose. There's a reason why you went through this.
Yeah. Wow, that is so fascinating. I've done breath work before, and I can attest to how absolutely powerful it is. And I'm really curious because you said that, you know, it kind of just instantaneously you went into this Kundalini awakening and all your spiritual gifts were just turned on. Now, I'm curious, did you have any kind of exposure or knowledge of spirituality up to this point? And was it like easy for you to just have these spiritual gifts all of a sudden? Or was it like, what's happening? Were you confused? I'd love to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, so as I was doing Joe Dispenza, I started to kind of go. I feel like when we first get into spirituality, we go into a phase where we're just trying to get as much information as we possibly can. So I was like reading Joe Dispenza's book. I was listening to people like Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, learning about quantum physics, just really that deep dive into as much spiritual knowledge as I could personally gain. So I started getting an idea of the things that were happening to me. I think that the spiritual abilities turning on, I think that it's just, I've always been very spiritually gifted. It's just, I was so deep into an addiction that I had no idea that I was spiritually gifted. So what I feel like happened is in that moment when I finally got off of methadone, because that was the first time I'd been sober probably since I was 14 years old. And I allowed all that emotion to leave my body because emotions, like, they really pull down our vibration. So it's harder for us to use our spiritual gifts. That's just why it's so important that we flow with them. But so when I decided to get off of methadone, I was so heavily, it was like a sensory overload. And so I think everything just turned on. Like it's like my nervous system had been so suppressed from those drugs for so long. And now that I was doing breath work and meditation, it polarized me to the opposite spectrum to where it was truly felt like a sensory overload. Like, it was, like, hard for me to even go outside because the light, it was so intense. Um, if even, like, my smell, my taste, getting off of those drugs, you realize how much it's actually suppressing your nervous system and all of your senses. Like, even, like, when I touch things, it felt like my touch, like, if I was like, "This is what things feel like," and this is after tapering myself all the way off of these drugs. Like, I was only on 5 milligrams, and these drugs were still having that kind of effect on my nervous system and on my senses. And so then when I went into my spiritual awakening truly and all of these spiritual abilities turned on all of a sudden, it was a little scary at first, especially when you start to become aware of the beings around you that have always been there. It's just now you're starting to open yourself up to them. And so I definitely had some experiences that were pretty frightening, but it was just teaching me how to live with them, how to use my spiritual abilities. And then it's just been kind of like my own learning process of how to use spiritual abilities and how to create a better human experience for us now. So I think a lot of people, especially if they're catapulted into this space where their spiritual abilities just go from 0 to 100, it's hard. A lot of people want to use it to escape this reality, especially if our clairvoyance is turned up all the way without us doing the inner work. That's where you're getting a lot of people where they just want to escape this reality, or the people that feel like they're missing home. It's because they haven't grounded themselves in this reality and they haven't worked through their traumas so that they can actually create the life that they deserve and they desire. And we can use our spiritual abilities to help us do that.
I agree 100%. And actually, my journey was I got out of treatment in 2008, and I went to a holistic spiritual recovery center, but I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go there because it's holistic and it's spiritual. I went there because my addict self was like, ooh, they're not going to watch me as closely. I can act out there. But it was really a gift, right? It was really my intuition leading me to a place that was going to teach me a bigger picture than just this world. But what I did with that when I left treatment was I used all these spiritual principles um, to continue to stay in my drug and alcohol addiction. So I spiritually bypassed. I was like, I'm not of this world, right? I'm just in this world. And I don't want to identify as anything because, I don't want to limit myself. And so I definitely agree with you that there's a tendency to want to leave this world and escape this world rather than use what we know about the spiritual world to navigate what it's like to be human in this world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. So you're a hypnotherapist and you're a channel. Now, did channeling start right away for you? And I'm just curious about how those pieces came in. So how did you find your way there?
So I'm a BQH practitioner. So for people listening, BQH is just a form of QHHT that was created by Dolores Cannon. I'm certified in BQH just because I can do sessions online, and it just gives you the space to use your intuition a little bit more than QHHT does. But BQH is so powerful because it gives you the space to release trauma. So I really try to focus my BQH sessions on healing your most important traumas because we all hold trauma in our body. So this just gives you the space to get past the analytical mind so that you can feel the trauma and so that you can release your traumas and just take the higher perspective from them. So we put you in that space of being able to release your trauma, and then we put you into this beautiful space to connect you with your own higher guidance, where you can speak to your higher self directly, and your higher self can bring you messages on why are these things happening to you in your life? Why did you have to go through this trauma? Like I said earlier, I think it's when we get through those addictions that have been so dark, or even when we've been through these really heavy sexual traumas that happened to us when we were a child, when we get the higher perspective on, like, you chose this is why you chose this, it seemed like the most horrible thing that possibly could have happened then, but this is why it happened. That is such a powerful moment for people, and that puts you back into the place of empowerment. So I always want to empower people so that we can release this victim mindset, because that is only going to hold you back from creating the life you want for yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much for offering that because several times throughout this conversation, I have wanted to bring that in, that we are not victims, that somewhere before we incarnated here, we actually chose this path. We knew that it was a possibility. And in my life, yeah, I look back and there's a good, I mean, I was in my eating disorder since I was 5. So from 5 to 28, I was doing that. And from 19 to 34, I was partying all the time and making choices that um, didn't really lead to the life I wanted, but they all did in some way because I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't be able to empathize or help so many people or understand the struggles. If I hadn't walked through hell, I would not be able to know heaven. And so I love that your work is designed to see the bigger picture of how we chose everything, really. I'd love it if you could speak a little bit more about um, how or why we chose some of the things we choose.
So I think for me personally, especially choosing the addiction that I chose, a lot of healers, they get caught up in like there's this huge awakening. We all have to help each other awaken. This event's gonna happen. This is the energy of today. Like just things that are taking away from living life to the fullest in the present moment. And I think the biggest moment for me that changed the way that I saw my addiction, because I had those same thoughts, is like when I saw how spiritually connected I was like, "Oh, well, I could have had a spiritual awakening 2 years earlier, still been through this entire addiction, and, like, I would have been able to help people longer." And I would fight with myself for a while about that. And then one day, this thought came into my head that came from a place greater than myself, where it was just like, when will you see the beauty of this life was the addiction? And I just broke down crying. And that was the day that I just like surrendered. And I surrendered to like my own darkness within myself, because now I can see that like my light is so bright because I went into that darkness, and now I'm not afraid to go there. So it's like if I need to help other people that are in that kind of darkness, now I can help them find their own light in the darkness. And it's just created this beautiful polarity in my life of not being afraid to go to these dark places, understanding why they're here in our life, and then using it as wisdom. And there's so many people where this life is so extreme and it can feel so overwhelming, but the amount of evolution that we're reaching in just one lifetime is so incredible in the life that we're living. And it's almost like this opportunity has been created where one human being can live multiple lifetimes just in one lifetime. And so the amount of evolution that your soul is cycling through over and over and over is so incredible. And I think I try to wake up in gratitude for that every day.
Wow, that was really powerful. The beauty of this life was the addiction and the journey. And the other thing that really popped out at me was how you said that we can live different kind different lifetimes, different lifestyles, have different life experiences all in the same lifetime, because it's true. 10 years ago, I was not living this reality, not even close. And, I was able to have that experience, and now I'm having this experience. And you could literally say they're two different lives now. So,
Yeah, and I think that that's like that is why I love the way that Joe Dispenza breaks it down, is because he is so he cuts it down in a way so that anybody can understand it, of how like your beliefs create your reality creates your personal reality, and then that is creating your entire reality of what you're focusing on of the things that you're experiencing. And so if we just start with our belief system, and if we just start watching the thoughts that we're having every single day, then that is going to push us into the personal reality that we want to create for ourselves. And it's really interesting because, like, when you hear that, when you hear that you can live multiple lives in just one lifetime, you look back on your life and you're like, I can see the points where I shifted when my belief system shifted, my thoughts shifted, and I can see where I started to create a different reality for myself. And then the other person that I saw, Matthias De Stefano, one time, he said that um, a lot of like star seeds and light workers, especially since I do BQH, they think that they're always making it up. Like when they start to get information from their guides, when they start to get information from their higher self, they're like, oh, that can't be true. Whether it's like worthiness blocks or um, just not trusting in their own intuition. That is probably one of the number one things that my clients always bring to me is I'm making it up. And the most beautiful thing I have ever heard Matthias De Stefano say is, of course, you're making it up because you're creating a new reality. And so we have to think new thoughts that we've never thought before. We have to use our imagination to create something entirely new, because if we're not making up something new, then we're just living in the old. And so I just thought that that was the most beautiful thing.
Yes, I love that so much. I was smiling so big when you said that because, in my journey of sobriety, after I stopped medicating and numbing myself out and started to actually really feel my feelings and clear out, I have been shown a lot of different gifts, channeling, being a medium, and there's always this little thread of like doubting myself, right? Like, I'm just making that up. That's just my imagination. And uh, I've learned to just speak it out anyways. But I love that, of course, we're making it up because we have to create new images. We have to create in our minds, something new. I've heard in many different ways, the laws of this explained, like our thoughts are literally writing the transcript of our movie. And so if we have a thought like, oh, I want to go to Hawaii, then that's going into the transcript. The universe is like, okay, she wants to go to Hawaii. But if I have a thought behind that that says, I'm never going to get there, I can't afford it, the universe is also like, okay, that's going into your movie. Okay, that's going into your movie. Like the universe doesn't care what we're thinking because the universe doesn't judge, right? So if we have a thought, that goes into the life of our movie. So we have to think new things. We have to think of possibilities in order to create a new experience. So that was absolutely beautiful. I'm curious, I know we've been talking for a little bit, and I know that you said you channel and that you channel your higher self. I'm curious if there's anything that your higher self or just you here, sitting here, then both are the same, has to offer the audience that is listening today.
To We're really in a time where it's time for us to reclaim our power. And so I think this is a shift that I'm going through personally as well. So we talk about multiple lifetimes in one lifetime. I feel like I'm going through another awakening where of just full empowerment of like how many things are we doing that is just distraction, or how many things are we doing that is putting off our healing and putting off us facing our traumas. And so when you get really excited about spirituality and you dive down the rabbit hole, just ask yourself, just build your discernment. Like, is this really helping me with my traumas? Is it really helping me with my emotions? because there is so much information out there and there's so much to distract you from what is really truly important, that the best thing that you can possibly do is just turn within yourself right now. That's why I've decided to only channel my higher self. So like I went on this, we like I said, we go through a phase where we just try to gain as much information as we possibly can. And so if I lived my entire life in addiction and I was just trying to find everything outside myself to make myself feel better, I came to a place where I was doing that exact same thing with spirituality, where I was just going outside of myself and gain as much information as I possibly could. I was channeling all of these different beings outside of myself, using all of these different modalities outside of myself. Um, and so, how can you come back to yourself to empower yourself? And I realized that if I just channel my higher self, then that was it always brought through the information that was the most loving. It brought through the information that was the most needed at that time. When I was channeling all these different beings, it felt different. It felt anxious. It felt like, what event's gonna happen? Or it didn't feel as loving. And so I realized that everything that I've needed is within myself. It's almost like I've been on this journey my entire life to go outwards, to go on this journey of everything outside myself until I could finally come back and be like, it is within me this entire time. And when you find that place of sovereignty, there is nothing more beautiful. When you find that place of sovereignty, especially when you've found your connection to the divine, whatever you feel like that connection is to you, you live in such a place of love and peace. Like, I feel like I finally have peace in my life.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And a recent interview that I did with Christian Sundberg, his one of his main messages was to really visit that silence within. And that, yes, it is true that we do need to be exposed to something other than our sick thinking. So there is a purpose in that, going outside of yourself, right? To learn. But like the AA program says, self knowledge availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point, and so there's a point where we have to make that switch. And there's so much information just getting to go inside. And the Course in Miracles also says that the kingdom of heaven is within you. So we just have to ask. I have 3 questions that I ask all my guests. So the first question is, how would you define God?
The divine essence within myself and the divine essence in every single person in this reality, in this construct, the divine essence of the reality that you're in, truly the purest light and that purest connection to source.
Thank you. The next question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
I think that each life can have its own purpose. I think the purpose for the overlying purpose of like what we're seeing now, um, of the reality that's playing out, it's to come back to unconditional love after experiencing everything that you are not.
And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
This is like where I get emotional because it's like I've come to the place where I don't want to change anything about my path. Like, I think that it's been so beautiful. It's been hard, but it's been so beautiful. So, like, I think I would just hug like my 7-year-old self and be like, you're gonna make it through and it's gonna be okay. But there's nothing that I would actually change, or I don't even think there's like wisdom that I would give her, because it's like there's a wisdom that I gained along the way that was so important to the path.
Yeah, completely understand that. How do people find you?
So I do have a membership platform where I do like group hypnosis, group live coaching. There's a beautiful community on there. It's on Patreon at Quantum Awakening Portal. My website is awakenedheartbqh.com. And then my YouTube channel is at Brooklyn Quantum Healing.
Awesome. I'll be sure to include all of that information in the description of this show so that anyone who feels called to reach out and join your community or get in touch with you can do so easily. Ceirra, thank you so much for being here today. I love this conversation. I love talking about spirituality, recovery, and both of them combined is just even more fun. So I appreciate you for sharing your heart, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom, and being someone in the world that's really trying to offer your gifts to help everyone live the life that they're meant to live. So it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And it was so beautiful to be here with you today. I loved our conversation.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.